weet wel echt zo. Dat mensen zeggen, ja, ik moest ook gewoon even kwijt. Ja, snap zeggen. Dus dat is niet te doen. Hoeveel is het? Ik weet, ik heb 100 hoeveel mensen, ja, zo zijn we zin. Ik probeer het echt. Hoeveel mensen steken?
Hele direct. Dat is super inefficiënt voor de bank.
Dan stap je uit en
everybody's going to keep quiet from now. I mean, the sound slowly buzzed away, so I'll take that as a cue for me to step up here and slowly introduce what we will be doing here this evening. So I'd like to welcome everybody here to DIA. For the people who don't know who DIA is, we are a software company. We focus on making good connections between several parties, making sure that everything runs well, and we build that with our dedicated teams. Some of the team members are sitting in the room here as well. Some might be joining us online through one of the cameras. Tonight we will be having two talks, one by Sander Brinke and one by Rick Kuipers. I believe, yeah, Rick, enjoy your salad. In between, there will be a break of about 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and every talk is about 50 minutes, I think. 40. That's perfect. Okay, because I was about to say that's including some time for questions. So if you have some questions, make a mental note of them so you can ask them afterwards, or maybe if one of you prefers to have them asked between the sessions, then just give that a shout. Yeah, that's it basically. There's still some apple pie, I think. So for the break, then we can enjoy some apple pie. I believe everybody had their drinks and their stomachs full. So I think we're ready for our first talk. That will be Sander. He recently was shining, I've read, on the Tweakers Development Summit, which is quite cool. It's a website I frequently visit. So that's always nice to see someone up at the stage here who's actually actively involved there. I was reading through your introduction. I was thinking, like, what is a good analogy for this? And I felt like, yeah, maybe sometimes I go to the supermarket to stock up my fridge, and then I come home and I found that something's already in my fridge, yet I bought it again. Like there's a duplicate coming along, and then, yeah, somehow I have to deal with it. But I hope tonight we will be all inspired to, yeah, maybe do something about that fridge, or maybe take it into the software that we develop on a daily basis. So a warm welcome to Sander.
Hello. Zo vul ik de tijd. Jongens, niet zo druk zetten. Nee. Ben ik zo goed te verstaan? Top. Oké. Dan hebben we de timer starten. Even zien. Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And for those at home, don't know where are the cameras? There. And there, right there. Great. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Sander Brinke, and the reason I'm here tonight is to talk about a technology that can be very interesting for any developer that works on any kind of front end. This technology is pretty old, though, and pretty unknown, though we're going to measure that in a bit. And it's very useful for like lots and lots of reasons. Though tonight we're going to talk mostly about removing duplicate code from your code base, the code that you didn't even consider that was duplicate code before. I think it's very, very interesting to talk about. So it's called HeyToS, and tonight I want to show you how you can learn to love it as much as I do. And when I say HeyToS, you might be very confused because it sounds pretty weird, it's difficult to pronounce, and if you actually see what it means, it makes no more actual sense than like 2 minutes ago. It stands for Hypermedia as the engine of application state, and that's a whole mouthful of words that we're gonna, take a look at later. But for now, I'd like to see, is there anyone in the audience that already knows what HeyToS is, who has worked with it before? Absolutely no one. Oh, that's a first. Good. Well, good. Then we're gonna just go through it slowly, and at the end, of course, if you have any questions, then we'll answer them, and that'll be fine. So what makes HeyToS so interesting? Well, like I already said, it can remove lots of duplicate code from your code base. For instance, it can do multiple things, but that's, for me, the most interesting part. And duplicate code, I would like to define as, you have an instance of your code, and you're going to duplicate it, have it written in multiple parts, and at some point, you're going to have to update that code. And you're going to forget to do so, introduce bugs, and we don't want to do that. In fact, it's such a big principle of our software engineering world that we have a little acronym for it, right? Writing dry code. Don't repeat yourself. I came onto a project about 5 years ago, and I came out of school and I thought I knew everything, and then I saw that they were using this technology, so I was very confused. Also, I didn't know anything. And then a team member told me, hey, H2S, we're using that here and here, and it works like this, and we remove duplicate code. And my mind was kind of blown. I thought it was such an interesting technology, and I thought it very weird that no companies and no projects use it. So let's take a look at what that is and how useful it can be. First, just a little bit about me. My name is Brinke. I'm a lead software engineer at Arcady. Maybe some of you already know Arcady. I think it was this year or last year that one of my colleagues, Wessel Lot, talked here about web components. He talked about it in Utrecht. For those that have no idea what Arcady is, we are a consultancy company, meaning that I and my colleagues go to different companies to help them write awesome and future-proof software. I love doing that with Microsoft technologies like .NET, C#, and Azure, though you can see I love working on lots and lots of other technologies as well. Just a little tidbit I need to add. In the middle of part of the presentation, we're going to have some time for questions, and also at the end. But I'll let you know. So, how to fall in love with H2S. What are we going to talk about today? So we're going to start with the basics. What is H2S? What does it look like? What can it do? Then we're going to take a look at this problem of duplicate code, this surprising duplicate code. What is this problem? Why is it relevant for all of our applications? And then we're going to learn the ins and outs of H2S. We're going to see exactly what it can do and a little bit more in-depth information. And in the end, we hope to form a match. Hope that everyone here falls in love with it, because we're going to see exactly how it solves our problem and how we can start using it, and some alternatives and some resources so everyone can get started using it whenever they want. Good. Let's start talking about the basics of H2S then. So this slide doesn't contain any H2S yet. I just want to add a little preface here. In this presentation, we're going to use Twitter a whole lot, because that's a really good platform that lends itself well to this presentation. Is there anyone here that doesn't know Twitter, especially since the late news about it? Good. And there's also literally no way you couldn't know it at this point. So what we're looking at here is a screenshot of the first ever tweet on the Twitter platform. So that was in March of 2006. And it was Jack. At that point, he was the CEO of Twitter. He tweeted, "Just setting up my Twitter." And on the right, we see what I would think a basic Twitter API would return. Because, I didn't want to use the real Twitter API for this presentation because it's very complex, so I just kind of came up with my own version of it. So every time I'm talking about like Twitter code and showing bits of code, it's all made up. But I hope it will still prove my point. So what I think, if you look at the screenshot on the left, it probably would be the code, or that would be returned, would probably be a bit like JSON, like this, with an ID and a user ID, a bit of text, a couple favorites, a couple retweets, stuff like that. Then what does H2S give us on this? If we add H2S on this, what does it give us? Well, H2S is an open standard. It's an open technology that you can add on top of any REST API. So, and I would need to say, maybe there are some people in here, well, there are no people in here that know H2S, but maybe some people here think, or have read online, if you want to write a REST API, you have to implement H2S. It's basically one of the principles that no one knows. It's kind of a can of worms that I don't want to open here. So for now, let's just say, if you want to add H2S, you need to have a REST API. But it's an open standard and open technology. So you can add this. It doesn't matter what kind of language you use. You can use C#, Python, PHP. It really doesn't matter what tools or platforms you use. So in a normal API, we're just returning some data. We're asking the API for some data. The server returns it to us. H2S makes your API a whole lot smarter, because instead of just returning data, we're going to return links to related resources and actions. That sounds pretty vague, so let's have a look at it. So in the top, you can see the ID and the user ID and the text and just normal data. But in there on the bottom, you see links, and that is what H2S gives us. H2S here gives us 2 links. Each link contains an href, a rel, and a type. The href is the URL where this resource or action takes place. The rel is the human readable version of it, like the relationship. And the type is the HTTP method you need to execute for this. So we have two links, which say you can do a post to API/tweet/20/retweet to perform a retweet. Or you could do a post to API/tweet/20/favorite to do a favorite. Now, this is a pretty small example. If we were looking at Twitter, you probably have lots more links. For example, we could have a link, like a get link, to get more information about the user. We have a magical user ID there, but the client has no idea where to get more information about the user. So Hey2S allows us to tell the client, here you go. If you want more information about the user, do a get request to API/users/12. And there's lots of other links, reply links, delete links. You can add lots and lots of stuff to it. But for now, let's keep it simple. When I explain this concept, I usually get two questions. So who uses this, and isn't this very complex? So companies like Visa, GitHub, and PayPal, big companies, they use this concept of Hey2S and the underlying concept called hypermedia. You can go into their API documentation, you will see that they're using this. Not something that I just came up with last week. And isn't this very complex? Just returning a bit of data from our API, it's pretty simple. We all know how to do that. But you see stuff there with like links to other endpoints and HTTP methods. It might sound pretty complex. Luckily, it's not. Later on in this presentation, we're going to see how easy it is with just 3 lines of code to start using a basic version of this. So let's start talking about this problem, the problem of duplicate code. And I actually define it as client-side business logic. So let's agree on 2 things first. If we want to have validation in an application, we always have to validate things on the server. That's very important. And then preferably, we also add it on the front end to provide a nice user experience. If we only validate things on the front end, like some people do that, you don't, you shouldn't, what happens is that the client could disable their JavaScript. They could alter the JavaScript because it's running on their browser. They could just immediately talk to your API without using your front end. And that way, they can avoid any validation, meaning that they could just ruin your server and ruin your database with invalid data. That is why we always validate things on the server, because the user cannot change that code. But also, we validate on the front end because we want the user to have a nice experience. If we wouldn't validate on the front end, the user would fill in all of their taxes, somewhere in the beginning of the year, and then at the end, they get an error from the server saying that everything is wrong and they have to do it again. It's not what we want to do. So we do that twice. The second thing we have to agree on is the idea of business logic, what that is. And I would say it's kind of the thing between your UI logic and like your data storage logic. So I want to perform an action on my platform, and then it goes to the server, it processes things, it checks a lot of things, it validates if you want to do that, and then it stores it in the database. So that's critical part of processing and validating. Sure, that's business logic. So let's talk about what we see here. Anyone here that doesn't know WhatsApp? Good. Not even really going to wait for an answer. Everyone knows WhatsApp. Here I am an administrator of WhatsApp, and I want to add someone to the group. Well, following WhatsApp's rules, you are allowed to add someone to a WhatsApp group if you're an administrator and if the group is not full. And currently we see that I am allowed to add someone to the group. This entire concept here is duplicate code. Because how does WhatsApp know, how does the client know that I'm allowed to do this? It must have a bit of code somewhere in this Android app saying, if the user is an admin and the group is not full, render this button, otherwise don't render the button or make the button grayed out, something like that. I'm going to add someone to the group, I'm choosing someone, and goes to the server, and the server checks, hey, is the user allowed to do this? Is the user an admin? And also, is the group full? Because if it is, I'm going to throw an error because it's not allowed. The problem here is that if WhatsApp changes its validation, for example, every Friday, everyone is allowed to add someone to the group, or more realistically, the group size is increased, they're going to have to update the server and the client. That is a problem. That's duplicate code. We don't want to do that, but we all do this. Basically all of our applications that we've ever written contain front-end validation for our actions, which is duplicate code. Let's take another example of Twitter. I tweeted earlier this year that I was accepted as a speaker for the Tweaker Developer Summit. Let's say that I want to delete this tweet. Right here, again, the same problem. I want to delete a tweet. How does Twitter's front end know that I'm allowed to do this? It has to have a bit of code somewhere, right? If the user is the owner of the tweet, then render the delete button. Otherwise, don't render the delete button. So again, duplicate code because the server is checking it. Now let's start a little case study. Let's say I am Elon Musk. I have $40 billion lying around, and I buy the Twitter platform. So I want to add a feature saying that I want to only allow tweet deletion until there are 1,000 retweets, because otherwise the tweet is too popular. Let's start implementing that. Well, you know, if we think about implementing it, it is probably not that difficult. We're just going to have an if statement somewhere in the front end saying, well, only show that delete button if the amount of retweets is smaller than 1,000. And right, we also have to test that, and we have to release that. But most importantly, we have to write the same code on our backend. We have to test that, we have to release that, stuff like that. And you think you're done. But a lot of big applications, they don't just have a backend and a front end. We're talking about Twitter here, which also has an iOS app, an Android app, and a Windows app. Back in the day, if you still know these platforms, they had a Windows Phone app and a BlackBerry app. We're already talking about 7 platforms here for bigger applications. 7 platforms that contain the exact same code that you have to change 7 times to add an if statement somewhere. And that's just it. We're not talking about adding a bit of code here. We're talking about, you know, probably teams, different teams having owning different apps with different sprints, different release schedules, all have to come together just to add this if statement. Everything needs to be tested. You're releasing. Apple is always very annoying and probably rejects your app update because you need to change your policies again. You're going to be busy with this for quite a while. Anyway, you're done. All is good. You've finished the story. You can move on to the next one. And then you suddenly realize that you broke all of the third-party applications, because big platforms usually have third-party applications, like they have an open API. You can write bots or fun applications for them, including third-party applications like TweetDeck or Hourly or Talon. You cannot update these applications. So they are still going to show that delete button for a tweet with like 1 million retweets. And then the server is going to return an error, like you should not have done that because that's not allowed. So now all those third-party applications have to kind of run after you, updating their code constantly. And you're going to, every time you change your business code, you're going to break them, which you don't want to be doing. So let's take a look at what that could look like in code. It's pretty simple, but I think it explains the problem like very clearly. So we're going to keep using this example of Jack's first tweet with the ID, the user ID, a bit of text, the amount of favorites, and the amount of retweets. So I'm going to take a look here at some Angular code, which is a framework to write web applications with. It's the one I'm most familiar with, so that's why I chose. And even if you don't know Angular, even if you don't know web development, it's pretty simple, so I'll take you through it. We want to render a delete tweet button, but only if the tweet can be deleted, right? That makes a lot of sense. Oops. And the tweet can be deleted logic, you can see that on the bottom. It's a function, tweet can be deleted, or a getter really, which returns a Boolean, true or false. And it says, well, the user ID of the tweet needs to be the same as the current user ID. So you need to be the owner. And the amount of retweets needs to be 1,000 or less. Pretty simple. We've implemented the feature. But we also have to update all our clients. When that is done, we have to update the server, which is exactly the same code, just now written in a better programming language called C#. So this function says can be deleted, which returns a Boolean, takes in a current user ID, and you check if the user ID is the same, and the amount of retweets needs to be 1,000 or less. Now, of course, these examples are pretty easy, pretty simple. But if we just think about more advanced features in all of our applications, like web shops that want to process orders, is that product still available? Is the user allowed to check out? Or do they have the right rights or age to access this resource? Every application has a lot of business logic to check if you're allowed to perform these actions. This is just one of the examples. So you see duplicate code. You're done. And your manager comes to you and tells you a user should be able to now delete a tweet until there's 5,000 retweets. In fact, that's probably just changing a number, right? So can you do this before lunch? Well, we can change the code before lunch, probably. But again, there's 7 platforms to update just for this one little feature. There's the backend and all of your clients. And again, you're going to break your third-party applications because they are still going to show a delete button for tweets with 10,000 retweets. Yeah, that's right, something like that. So no, it's not going to be done before lunch. It's going to maybe be done in 2 or 3 weeks if we want to align all the releases together. And maybe we want to give the third-party applications a month or 2 to update so they are, not broken every time we push. That's not something you want to tell your manager. So wouldn't it be really cool from a theoretic standpoint to say, if we just update the code on our server, all of our apps are instantly updated. I don't even need to touch them anymore. They're just instantly updated. And well, that's possible with HeyToUS, which I'm going to show you. For now, are there any questions so far here or in the audience about what we've talked about so far? Nope. Good. Then we're going to continue. So we can do this with HeyToUS. Again, HeyToUS stands for Hypermedia as the engine of application state. And I tried to kind of explain it on the right because it's a very, very vague sentence. So thanks to links, and links are kind of the core concept of a thing called hypermedia, the answer of your API, which traditionally is the engine, it will now show related resources, current state, and possible state changes. I like to think the most important way to remember HeyToUS is instead of just returning data, we're returning links to related resources. Exactly like the principle from before, we're returning, if you want to retweet this tweet, perform a post to API/tweet/20/retweet, or favorite, delete, reply. All of the actions in your platform are links. So let's talk a little bit more about a very important concept of HeyToUS. These links that I'm talking about, they are not, things you could do. They are things you're allowed to do. Our applications usually have tons of different sorts of users. Twitter has a signed out user. They have a signed in user. They have the owner of the tweet. They have service desk employees if they haven't fired them all. And they have like administrators, lots of different users. And with HeyToUS, you can kind of represent that as well. So what HeyToUS is telling me here, these links are telling me, you are allowed to retweet this. Like they check your permissions. It's not like perform the call and see if it's allowed. No, if the link is there, the server tells you you are allowed to do this. So in this case, the server is telling me I can retweet and I can favorite. Well, if I'm the tweet owner, if I'm Jack, the previous CEO of Twitter, he could delete his tweet in this example. He could perform a delete to API/tweet/20 to delete his tweet. He could also sell his tweet for $2.9 million as an NFT, which actually happened last year. I thought that was very ridiculous when I was making this presentation, and then the last month Twitter was bought, and I could have had 10 better examples. But let's just keep it at this one. It's something he could do, so it's something he did. And the last one I want to show you is that a list of tweets could also have links itself. So here we're returning a list of tweets. Each tweet could contain links. And you see that the list itself has an add tweet link. So you could do a post to API/tweets, and then you could, for example, add a tweet to that list. So again, the links are not possible things. The links are like the things that are possible, and you're allowed to do them. And that's very important if we're going to talk about fixing this problem with HeyToUS. Because what we're doing here is we're looking at the example from before. So we have the code here. We want to render a delete tweet button, but only if the tweet can be deleted. And in the bottom, we have that code again where we're checking if the amount of retweets are 1,000 or less, and now we change it to 5,000. We've done so. 3 other platforms come peeking around the corner, telling you you also have to update those. You've done, and now all the third-party applications break. This just happens all the time. It's a thing that happens in our software engineering world. So we fix this with HeyToUS in the next slide, and I want you to pay attention to the bottom line because it's extremely small, what we're actually changing, but it has a huge impact on like our software and also maybe on the idea on how we could write software better. Because with HeyToUS, we have no more business logic here. What we're doing here on the bottom is we have the same exact code as the top code is the same as before. We have a tweet can be deleted function. And all we do now is we're saying, grab the links from the tweet and check if there's at least one link that says that is the delete link. If that exists, then we're going to render the delete button. And this works because instead of just returning data from your API is giving data and everything that you're allowed to do. So if the API tells you you can delete this tweet, then there's no more reason to have any business logic in your front end because the server tells you to do so. So now what we can do is change our business logic in the backend, which will mean that our links will now change because the link will be returned more or less often. And automatically, your apps will be updated instantly by a release of your backend. And it's not just your web app that's updated immediately. It's your iOS app, it's your Android app, it's your Windows app. It doesn't matter what application you have. As long as you're just checking, hey, thanks for the data, but can the server also tell me that I'm allowed to perform the action? Your front end no longer needs to care about it. Meaning that, as I said on the left, everything keeps working. But on the right, even cooler, I think, is the fact that your third-party applications can hook into this. Your third-party applications can be written in any language they want with any design they want. They can just check, hey, did the server tell me that I can delete it? If so, I'm going to perform it. Your applications don't care anymore about your business logic because they shouldn't have to. Your applications should provide a nice user experience that represents the way your app works. They shouldn't have duplicate code in them because they need to check if your actions are allowed. Your server knows your actions are allowed, so tell the client about it. That's the entire idea here. A little bonus feature is until now, you see that we're only using the rel, right? The relationship, the human readable bit of text. We also still have that URL and the HTTP method available to us, which can be very useful because at some point, we're going to click on that delete tweet button and we're going to perform the deletion. And we're going to have to go to a server somewhere and tell it to delete. But how does your front end normally know what that URL is? Well, somewhere in your code base, you have a list of all the possible actions. You have a list of hard-coded links to your server, right? And if that ever was to change, you'd have to update your front end again, which is the exact same problem of duplicate code again. We don't want that. So what we can do is if the user wants to delete this tweet, we can grab that URL from that link that the server tells us where we can perform this action. If the URL ever changes on the server, if we would want to change the way our API is structured, our links could be automatically updated and our front end is automatically updated as well. Meaning that you can just change the URLs in your server and your applications would keep working. To me, that's a very cool concept because normally we always use API versioning and kind of stuff like that to keep applications working if we change our structure. But with HTOS, that's no longer necessary. Your server is smart. It tells the client what it wants and what it can do, so your client doesn't need to figure that out anymore. So now, to me, because I'm a backend person, let's talk about the most interesting part and how you can implement this on your server. We're going to take a look at two examples here. One is a pretty easy one, which is this one, kind of a quick way to get started, which has a couple of downsides that we're going to fix in the second example. So here we're looking at an ASP.NET Core minimal API written in C#. Now, we're not going to talk about what that all is because it's not interesting for now. Just maybe if you've ever written Node.js or like Express, this might look familiar to you. It's pretty new in the .NET world. So what we have is we have a web application, and we have an endpoint, API/tweets/ID. And what we're doing is the second someone calls that endpoint, we retrieve that tweet from the database, and we check. If the tweet can be deleted, we want to add a link. Tweet.links.add, and we add a new HTOS link with that text, with the URL, with the HTTP method. And then we return the tweet. That's as simple as that. Because our core business logic is in that can be deleted logic, in that can be deleted function, I meant to say. So if we change that code, our links are instantly returned less or more often, and our clients are instantly updated. So basically, if you were talking about the principle, it's one line of code because we're just adding an item to a link, to a list. But there's a bit of a downside here. One of the downsides is that like I already said, our applications have multiple actions. There's not just deletion in Twitter. There's retweeting, there's favoriting, there's replying, there's, I don't know, maybe sharing. Maybe it's a bad example. But you can imagine on any platform, on any application, a web shop, or just an application in general has multiple actions, meaning that we would get lots and lots and lots of if statements in here, which we don't want, because it will remove the testability of our code, it will remove the readability from our code. You just don't want to do that. You want this kind of logic to be in a separate bit of code. We want to keep things, solid. So let's take a look at how we can do that using a library. Here we're going to look at a bit of code from a library called Municio that I am working on. It's still a work in progress. Just to let you know, you can't install it yet, but I'm working on it. And now we're looking at a bit of code here that's ASP.NET Core custom middleware. Explaining that is kind of a talk on its own, so we're not going to do that. We're looking at the function here, enrich async. Oh, let me go back. It sometimes bugs out a little bit. This function is going to get called the moment you're kind of done retrieving that tweet from the database and you're returning the tweet to the client that requested it. And now we're intercepting it and we're saying, hold on a second, wait a minute. I want to do a little bit more with the data that we're returning to the client. And what we're doing is we're grabbing that model on the bottom, the model that we're returning, and we're saying, add a delete link when the tweet can be deleted and when the user is authorized to do so. Now, this example, to me, is a whole lot better than the previous one. We can add lots and lots of different links in here. We can use lots and different kind of methods, like when and when async, or generate your own methods on how you want to be flexible with your links. And best of all, you can unit test this class. And you can just unit test your HTOS logic without breaking your other bits of API code, which I think is just really good. We'll have a link to this library later on as well. So let's talk a little bit about some alternatives. Because I kind of, maybe you're not really convinced about it yet. Maybe you need to look at this from a different point of view. So I want to provide a couple. So you could say, I'm not really a big fan of returning the URL and the HTTP method. I don't really care about it, and I think that those 30 extra characters are going to add too much weight to my API responses. You could think so. So then your following thought could be that we are going to just return in the links, we're just going to return retweet and favorite. And then your problem is also solved, because your client will just check, does the link array contain that bit of code, or sorry, that string, retweet or favorite, and everything would keep working. But you do lose the benefits of using an open standard and this open technology called HTOS. You could, if you go to your favorite package manager of your favorite programming language and you look for HTOS, you'll probably find something. Meaning that if you use an API that uses HTOS, you could parse these links automatically and could do cool things with them. This, again, is a custom format. So it is kind of a trade-off. Do you want to save 20 characters in your API response, or do you want to use them anyway and also benefit from the open standard? I'd recommend the latter, but something to think about. The next one, I think, is also a very strong point of view, that we can be very flexible with our HTOS links. Because what if you are working on a Twitter client that needs to be the fastest one on the App Store, the fastest possible one, and then you're saying, yeah, but the HTOS, it will take 2 more milliseconds to generate those links, and I don't want that, so I'm not a big fan of HTOS. We can work around that. We could send a request to our server in the accept header, in the HTTP accept header, saying that we want either application/JSON, or we want application/JSON plus HTOS, telling the server, hey, I am interested in HTOS, or I am not interested in HTOS. This also means that you could start adding HTOS to your clients bit by bit if you wanted to do so. Or you could switch, you could take a look, is the user running on slow internet? Maybe then you don't want some links and you have workarounds for that in your application. I'm not sure. The point is, you can be flexible and think of lots and lots of other ways around that. The third one is server-side rendering. And I don't know if anyone still here makes like multi-page applications where we're actually rendering HTML on the server instead of just doing it all in JavaScript. Good job, keep going. Well, if you're doing that, then this entire presentation could have been a waste of your time because, This also solves our entire problem. If we are rendering our HTML on the server, and the server again is where your business logic lives, then you have no need for HateOS. Because when rendering your HTML, you can already check if the tweet can be deleted, then render the delete button and return it to the browser. So you don't have any duplicate code anywhere. So then you could avoid using HateOS. So if you know that you're gonna be writing a very business logic heavy app with lots and lots of like actions, you could also think about like, if one of my goals is to avoid duplicate code, maybe I should do server-side rendering. So I see I'm a little bit ahead of the time, but that's probably fine. So my conclusion for now is that you can prevent client-side business logic by letting the API return data and possible actions. And you really have to, I think it's just a really cool thing to do. Instead of just returning data, tell the client what they can do with it. Because if they don't know, they're gonna have to write all of that code that you already wrote for them. And HateOS, pronounced HateOS, is a great choice for this. So let's start using HateOS. I told you all about it. Tomorrow I want to see lots of blog posts about people starting to use this. So I'm gonna give you all the possible resources to do so. The first best one is, of course, my website. Because, yeah, for every talk that I give, I aim to write a blog post about the topic. So if tomorrow you want to start implementing this, maybe you've forgotten a couple of details. On my blog post that I've linked there in the QR code, but also on the bottom, you can just also find on my website, doesn't matter, multiple ways to Rome. I've described exactly what I've told you in this talk. So if you want to read about it more, go ahead and check it out. If you know anyone that would be very interested in this concept, it's linked in the blog post. Do whatever you want to do. Some other very useful links are my library for HateOS. Again, it's still a work in progress. But if you like, working on code or you would like to help out, take a look at github.com/arcadiit/municio. And if you want to start, that's also very cool. If you are using .NET, and I actually don't think any of you are, I think everyone here is a PHP writer. No? Okay, good. Someone is using .NET here? Oh, great. Well, take a look at riskfirst.hateOS. Especially for you, I added this. Especially for you. So that's another HateOS library for .NET that is already working and stuff like that. I aim, of course, to be better, but that's also just a fine choice to use. And if you're not using .NET, I've looked around, and for every package manager of your favorite programming language, you can find the HateOS library, so you can start using this as quick as possible. And otherwise, if you can't find anything, I've shown you it's basically 3 lines of code to start using this concept. Just tell the client what they can do with your data. Don't let them figure it out themselves every time, for every client possible. Just tell them what they can do. Also, read the following links. restfulapi.net/HateOS is very interesting. hdmx.org kind of deserves its own talk because it's kind of very innovative in the building rich client applications without JavaScript. It really relies on topics like this, like HateOS and open standards, and just the way HTML was kind of intended to be run in the browser and to provide good user experiences. HDMX is really cool. And lastly, of course, a link to my website if you want to read that. Okay, at that point, I've reached the end of this presentation. So if there's any questions, I'd like to answer them. Yeah. I'll just go back to it quickly.
I think we used something in my previous job. It was a JSON standard nobody used, but you could also return the next page link and the previous page link. And we kind of extended that where we also made the CRUD endpoints. We already told the client what they could send like properties.
Yeah.
Because if you're creating a tweet, then you need to know what properties you can send to the server.
Yeah.
And we also used it for dynamic tables, where we had like every column, the type, and several other properties. So the client could just render anything.
That's very cool.
It's very dynamic. But I think it's the JSON standard, but I'm not sure what it's called.
I think I might have heard of it exactly.
Something.
Yeah.
Something similar. But so my question is really, what's the difference between that and HateOS? Is HateOS only the links, or is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, yes, HateOS. I talked in the beginning of the presentation about HateOS not being very popular, and I think this is kind of where the standard dropped the ball. It's like 20 years old or something like that. It was kind of invented with this idea of writing REST APIs, and later on we got technologies, GraphQL, whatever. You can see exactly that there's not a you can't pass the request body and stuff like that in this. There's extensions for that, like libraries like Siren that want to add that to it, and also add validation immediately, so you can validate everything on the front end. But I think maybe like the things you mean might kind of be just a take on HateOS or a take on its intent of like letting the client know what they can do, but with maybe a more modern view. It really depends. The only reason why, if you're writing like an application for your own company, you could use HateOS. You could also just use your own custom format or something like that. Whatever works best, really. Does that answer your question a bit? Good, good. Any other questions? Yeah.
So this seems to work very well for static business rules. Can I delete a tweet? Can I retweet a tweet? But how does it work with dynamic business rules? If you refresh your timeline, you get 100 tweets, but you're only allowed to do 10 retweets a day. In your
that's a good one.
In your 100 tweets that you've retrieved, it all says, yes, I can retweet, yes, I can retweet.
No, that's a very good question.
You fail. So how does HateOS solve that problem?
It doesn't. That's a great question. Yeah, I think, the only way that I could quickly kind of come up with an answer to that is that after you retweet, you would need, that's a great question. After you retweet, you would need to, retrieve it again. But if you do that, then your client already knows that there's only allowed to be so many retweets. So you have a bit of duplicate code. That's a great question. Yeah, I don't really think that that's a thing. But in these cases, I've got questions like this where these three properties don't really, suit your needs. Then I just tell people, like, are you writing a big open application like Twitter for multiple companies to use? And do you really care about listening to this standard? And most people say, no, I just want to get my job done. I would tell you, maybe just add like an extensions object with that in there, like max retweets or something. And then your client could still use HateOS and the server would still make the client a bit smarter about it. So just do your thing with it.
My solution. Thank you.
Yeah. I saw there.
Yeah, maybe a silly question, but what made you come up with the name Municio for your extension?
Oh, that's a funny question. I was having I say that. I was looking for existing HateOS libraries, and I saw a library called HateOS.net and thought it was awfully boring. I have one of the other libraries in .NET I really like called Scrutor, which is kind of a bit of a Latin name, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. That'll get me a lot of GitHub stars. So I tried to I opened Google Translate and I looked for something like removing client-side logic or removing logic, and then I kind of came up on two words that formed Municio. So it was very deep. Yeah. Thanks.
Right. So my question is, you're never really going to put all the business logic in the front end too, right? So it served for this example because in the front end here you would have the state where, for example, the tweets or the retweets have been over 5,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I could imagine a scenario in which you actually, for these business rules, have to look in the database. It's all a server-side call. And then maybe you can do something on the front end to get an approximation on what you're allowed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is kind of, I'm not really sure where I'm going with it, but don't you always have the same thing where you're kind of looking towards the back end to give you some data to then build your front end with? And in the case of doing this with this HateOS, all those clients would still need to update. First of all, to HateOS.
Once, just once. Yeah, they can update. They could still have duplicate code if they wanted to. We're just offering them the option, but yeah.
And then my other question was with workarounds. So So then you would have two different cases, right? So one where they do use HateOS and one where they still don't use HateOS.
Yeah.
You still have the duplicate code.
Yeah.
But you also don't have the duplicate
Yeah,
code.
but yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I just wonder maybe there's some way to like make that fast or make that do it by itself.
I don't really know. I mean, if we are offering, like, if let's say we just have current Twitter API without this HateOS stuff, and tomorrow they decide to implement HateOS, and of course it's going to take time for the clients to update, but we are giving them the option. If they choose to still have duplicate code, then I would say if there's a benefit to that, they can do that. But in most cases, I would say they should just migrate to HateOS. And if they choose not to, then just like in today's world, they're just going to break at some point because we're going to change our server. I don't think there's a real way around that, no. But once you've implemented HateOS and you just use those links, you would not need to update them if we ever change our server, because the links are now different.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sorry, but I still have
No
one more
worries.
question. So I've worked in situations where the business rules according, so let's say that this is the example, right?
Yeah.
So using a get on one tweet, and then it's looking in the business rules, okay, am I allowed to retweet this? Am I allowed to favorite this?
Yeah.
And those things will have, for example, I'm just like making up this example, but they go to different services somewhere else, so there's latency involved in the checking of these business rules. And now this is happening for every single call all the time. I'm just wondering, like, it's not really about the.
I understand, yeah. So you're more like, if there's problem on the server, then there's also problems on all of the clients.
Exactly. If one of those services fails, now I'm not even going to be able to see the tweet at all.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, but I think this is a problem that we can solve. Like I've also written, if we ever do communicate between services, it's always a very good idea to add. I don't know. You're the only .NET developer here, so if I were to give an example, it would not make much sense. There's like patterns for this stuff. Like the secret. Let me just give an example. The circuit breaker pattern is where if you perform multiple calls to a service and you just see that it's not working well, you could just immediately not perform the calls anymore. It is one way around it, but then your responses are quick again, and then maybe you could decide, like, I'm not going to return the tweet link, or I'm just going to return it even though I'm not sure if it's actually allowed. Although I would say I think it is a bit of an edge case about this. Yeah, it is a bit of an edge case. It is something to keep in mind, though. Yeah.
Hi. So I had a question about a front-ender is going to write end-to-end tests.
Yeah.
How would you see writing the end-to-end test with these links? Because you're still kind of have to intercept them, write another mock for them, and for example, if you're gonna write an end-to-end test mock with the first one, you're still gonna have to write the post, the href, the rel, and you're just mocking your end-to-end even more with.
So for example, we're end-to-end testing our retweets functionality on our Twitter web app or something is what you mean. Yeah, and then of course instead. So
basically, you're clicking the button that's saying retweet.
Well, the button is only shown if the link is there.
Yeah, but then you click the button, and the button is going to look at the href in your on the server, because you're getting it from the server. But then you have to keep your end-to-end test also always up to date with the links, with the post types, with the.
I'm not really sure, because where does in the end-to-end test scenario, where does this tweet come from?
I think a mock, for example.
Would we then in that case would we also be mocking the request to the server? Like, would there be a real server running?
Yeah, you would. But I'm just saying, if you're gonna you don't have the real server working, because we run it in the CI, for example. I just have a JSON file with the response, and now I'm gonna click the button. Cypress is going to click the button for me, for example. and well, it's going to do a post request to the href, but then you have to intercept on another place with the link you provided from your mock.
Mm-hmm.
Not okay. Maybe I'm not making sense, but you're gonna have to write the. I'm sorry.
I understand what you mean, but I think I can. I think you should. I think I understand you, and I think I can answer your question by. I think you should compare it to if you hadn't used Hey2S. If you're not using Hey2S, we would have a bit of duplicate code in our front end, like with our retweet logic, and it would also perform a call somewhere, but that is also just a link that is defined in your front end. So how is that any different? Instead of just using a link that is somewhere in a let or a const string somewhere in our content, we're now using it from this link, which is also just a variable. I mean, we can afterwards in a bit, we can grab a laptop, have a better look at it, for example, but sure. Anything else or anything at home? Otherwise, just one more.
Say you are allowed to retweet,
Mhm.
and you click on the button, but then what will the response be of that request? Because you need to refresh your Twitter message to see that you're not allowed to retweet anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the response of the retweet action?
That depends on your server. Normally, servers can do two things, right? They could either decide, I'm not going to return anything, because the client can decide if they want the new state, or you always return the new state. And if you return the new state after retweeting, the retweet button would be gone, because you've already retweeted it.
Yes, so you need to request again your Twitter message
Mhm.
to see you're not allowed to retweet anymore.
Yes, but without Hey2S, aren't you doing the same thing? Like you're retweeting it, and then...
Yes, but now your check
Oh.
is in the Hey2S links. So you just say you are allowed to retweet twice. So you
Mhm.
click on retweet, you do the action, then you need to request your Twitter message again to check if you are allowed to retweet again.
I guess you should. Yeah. Thank you. No, but the concept, I think the concept, yeah, I guess you have a point there. If you are relying on the server to tell you what you can do instead of the client, then you have to ask the server again if you can do it. Yeah. Again, the ways to work around it by extending Hey2S, but it is a big, yeah. I mean, if we're making our clients dumber, we're making our API smarter, we need to retrieve that data again. Yeah, I guess that's one of the benefits or downsides of using the solution. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have room for one more question if there's one more. No? Okay.
No.
I have one last
great.
question then. I was wondering, seeing it all this, and I'm not day-to-daily into diving into code, but I was wondering, what is the biggest change you've made so far with Hey2S?
Hey2S.
Yeah.
I think it allowed us to, I think I've worked on a couple of applications there. We were just quickly developing it, and like using Hey2S allowed us to make it a lot easier for beginner developers to just work on the most important parts. Like they could just like work on the new part of the application and use one of the links, and they're done, instead of having to figure out, open the backend. They are not experienced backend developers or front-end developers, so then they have to either read the story or read the backend code, convert it into client code.
Yeah.
Using Hey2S made it a lot easier, and it allowed us to iterate a lot faster.
Yeah. I think that's a great conclusion then as well, to say that it eases the learning curve in a code base or in a
I think so, yeah. I think it definitely can.
While using this. Okay, then thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for the questions.
And do connect and visit his GitHub and everything.
Definitely.
Get his.
I want to see a lot more page views tomorrow on my website.
We should know. All right, so now we will be having a 20-minute break, so we can be back here. I think 15-minute break, maybe. Let's say 15 minutes, and then we'll see who's here first. So we'll be back here at 8:15. So get some drinks. There's still some apple pie. I think everybody knows where to go. or have another chat with Sander, and then afterwards we will be enjoying a talk by Rick. Looking forward to that. I believe it's about decision making. So okay, yeah. So decide apple pie, more French fries. Yeah, we'll see you in 15 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, got some drinks. Fixed. Yeah, so welcome back, everybody. Now we will be enjoying a talk by Rick Kuipers. He will tell us something about decision making. Firstly, I hope your cat is okay, because you had a little introduction video and your cat was walking across. It's always nice to see some personal charm in the videos, right? Like, so that's great. Yeah, a warm welcome for Rick, and enjoy the talk.
Test. No. Oh, yes. It takes some time. All right. I'm not used to having hair. Okay, so where's my, there it is. Cool, okay, so it's great to be here, actually. It's been a really long time since I gave a presentation, so I'm actually quite a bit nervous. And it doesn't help that I'm afraid of heights, so this is definitely not helping me whatsoever. I hope that when I do fall, that it ends up with 9gag somewhere, I can at least laugh at it. At least it's being recorded. So let me just start the timer, just like Sander said. Decision making for developers. Let's get right into it. What does this number mean to you? Does anyone want to take a guess? Year income, sorry? You sound like you know it's the number for... Yeah, okay. No, you're actually correct. This sounds like a lot, right? So yeah, 35,000 decisions made on average per day. Now, I guess it's really hard to measure this, so I'm not sure how much attention you should pay to this number. But these include all your small decisions as well. So you have your micro decisions, which is me doing this with my hands, and also the macro decisions, which is me deciding to give this talk today. So I want to take you on a bit of a journey through this decision-making process, because it's actually quite complicated. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be the expert and I can tell you exactly what happens, but I do want to give you a few things that can help you along the way to making better decisions. So I want to start at the foundation. I want to start with the preconditions. What do we need to be a good decision maker? Now, I think a few of them are pretty obvious. Having enough sleep, I think, is the first and foremost that we should do. Can we all just to this picture? It's so cute. Okay, so the first thing we need is to make sure that we're well rested. Because if you're not well rested, your energy is going to be low. And surprisingly enough, you actually need energy to be able to make a proper decision. I think this is pretty obvious to most people. Now, the next thing, which is also really easy to influence, is being in a good mood, right? Choose to be happy. It's so easy, says the person with depression. No, this is extremely hard, obviously. So, but it definitely helps. It helps to put you into a good mood, to not be stressed, to not have other thoughts lingering in your mind, have emotions be annoying in whatever sense. So you want to be in a good mood. Now, something that's closer to us as developers is tasks. I mean, we love tasks, right? Stories, we love them. Is there anyone here who doesn't work with some kind of ticket or some kind of to-do list? Okay, literally no one. Oh, all right, please explain. You don't, okay. Oh, I shouldn't have asked. I should not have asked. I'm so sorry. Damn, that really caught me off guard. Okay, fair enough. But if you're ever feeling like you're in the midst of chaos, which I often feel is the case, what helps me most is making sure I'm well organized. So this means not just the things that are on my Scrum board or Kanban or whatever, but it also includes all the other things that you have to do that day. Because oftentimes we do a lot more things than just the ticket that we have assigned to us. So make that list and get yourself organized. Doing that will give you a greater sense of just clarity, being calm, having your mind at peace, which is a really good precondition for good decision making. Now, one tip I'd like to give you is to do this at the end of your day. So do this at the end of your day for the next day. When the next day starts, you don't have to think about what am I going to do today. Is the microphone okay? Because it sounds like it's screaming a little bit, or maybe I'm just being loud as usual. So try and do this at the end of the day. Let's talk about cars, or let's talk about driving. Anyone know what model this is, what car this is? Corvette, which one? Don't know. C8. Okay, I know fuck all about cars. Like I know zero. I'm glad if I know what is an Opel and what is a Toyota and a Renault and whatever. So I'm still struggling, but I do like cars. I like driving. I think it's fun to do. And I guess I don't know what the point of this slide is. I'm just trying to manifest this car onto my driveway and be like, all right, someday I'll drive this car. But let's talk about driving. Have you ever had the feeling where you arrive at your destination, you're like, all right, I arrived, and you stop the car and you're like, how did I get here? I have no idea how I drove here. I have no recollection of this. I'm holding the steering wheel, so I must have been driving. And you're sort of afraid to look back at flipped cars and mass destruction because you don't actually know what you did. Anyone recognize that feeling? A few people? Yeah. So luckily there's a name for that, which is on this slide. Slide's the wrong way around. It's called highway hypnosis, which is where you're so sort of in your own fantasy land and just dreaming about things, thinking about the dentist, I hope that's a dentist, basketball or whatever, and you're so caught up in this, you're not actually paying attention to what you're doing. Now compare that to the first time you're driving a car, right? Where if with a driving instructor or alone, you get into the car and you're sort of nervous. You know, you put on your seatbelts, you adjust your seats, you check the mirror to make sure it's correct because you don't want that guy next to you screaming at you. Push in the clutch, start the car, put it in first gear, drive off. But of course, there's family and friends watching you. You don't want to stall the car, so you're really careful. You release the clutch and you drive off. Eventually, you get to your destination. You're really proud. Like, I did it. You know, I drove the car. I didn't stall. You take off your seatbelt, you release the clutch, and then you realize you're still in first gear and you still stall the car. That ever happened to anyone? No? Okay, I see a few. I was worried. I was like, is this just me? So this is a big difference between a beginner and an experienced driver. The experienced driver has sort of made all of these things automatic. They've turned all these things into automatic motions, whereas the beginner driver is still very caught up on all the details. Now, to explain this a little bit further, and I'm sure some of you here have read this book. Not this book. This is not a book. Oh, please. This book. Anyone here read this book? Okay, a few nods. Good. So this is a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman. And he wrote in this book about System 1 and System 2. God damn it. Thank you. System 1 and System 2. I might need your I might need your pointer because yours obviously works better than mine. So if we look at the beginner driver, that person is still very much stuck. Actually, no, let me explain this first. So your System 2 is your fast and intuitive brain. It's the part where your emotions live. It's what's automatic. You don't really need any mental effort to be able to operate in System 1. Your System 2 is your slow and conscious brain. This is where your logical reasoning is. This is where if you start to make bigger decisions, your System 2 is going to act up. Now, your System 2 is constantly checking suggestions from System 1. System 1 is like, all right, I think I should do this. And System 2 is going to be like, is that a good idea? Okay, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So, but your System 2 is actually quite lazy. It needs mental effort to be able to do these checks on System 1. So you can imagine the beginner driver is still very much in their system too. They're very effortful in their thoughts, what they're doing with their hands, with their feet and everything. It's not automatic yet. Whereas an experienced driver is more in their system one. They're sort of relaxed. They've made most of their things intuitive. They can assess the situation a lot easier, and they don't need to put in any mental energy, which is why they can wander off into this highway hypnosis, if you will. The same goes for developers. So a junior developer is still very much caught up in trying to write the right syntax, trying to figure out how do I translate this code in my brain into an if statement. Should I use a for loop or a while loop? And does this impact anything else in my system? Actually, they don't really have any mental capacity to think about these things because they're still very focused on doing the simple things, the actual language and stuff. Now, a senior developer, on the other hand, they'll have made this a lot more intuitive. To them, it's automatic. They know, right, I'm going to write this if statement. I know exactly how to translate this. I'm going to use a for loop because that's better. And they have some more space and more mental capacity to think about other things in the system. To think about, hey, is this change going to impact anything else in my landscape, yes or no? So this helps them be a better decision maker when they're doing the coding. So that sounds pretty simple, right? Solution, just be more experienced. There you go, talk done. Obviously, that's not really a thing you can just do. That takes a lot of time. So what can we do? Ta-da, standards. Imagine there are no traffic rules. You're driving. That's a lot more effortful when you're driving. Suddenly, you can't make any assumptions. You don't know if someone's coming from the right. You don't know whether to give them way or not. It becomes a lot scarier, and suddenly you're a lot more in system too, constantly, because you don't have anything to automate. I mean, you can automate all the movements you're doing with the car, but you're still assessing every situation individually. You can't make any assumptions. So traffic rules are actually quite useful. They're annoying sometimes, but they create consistency. They create a sort of expectation where you know what to do. You know certain situations, and they occur time and time again, but you know what the other person is going to do, so you can do this whole interaction a lot better. The same applies for applying standards within code. They make a lot of the decisions for you, whether that's a code style standard or some architectural standard that you're introducing, but they help offload a lot of the mental load, the cognitive load of your system too. They make things a lot easier. You don't have to constantly make all these micro decisions all the time because you know it's going to be taken care of, whether that's automatically or you can at least look at a standard and just follow that standard. So, what do these two people have in common? Aside from the fact that they're both dead. Sorry? Well, yeah, they're pretty famous, yeah. There you go. Oh man, that was going to be so good. There you go. Exactly. They wear the same clothes. And the reason they do this, aside from it being kind of a trademark for them, obviously, if you see someone walking down the street in this set of clothes, you're going to be like, hey, that's Peter Griffin in real life. By the way, that's an actual YouTube channel. If you're interested, you can look them up. It's quite funny. But aside from that, what they're trying to, well, at least what Steve's trying to do, I don't know what Peter Griffin's trying to do, but what Steve's trying to do is prevent a thing called decision fatigue. When you're making a lot of decisions throughout the day, at some point, you're going to be a little bit more exhausted each and every time. And being exhausted, as we learned from our preconditions, is not a good state of mind to make good decisions. So what does Steve Jobs do? He wears the same clothes each and every day, so he doesn't have to think about it. He's like, right, I'm going to wear this. There, all I need to do. Now, I don't think any of us here is at a place right now where they need to be doing this. I hope not. And you probably wouldn't be sitting here if you did require that sort of extreme action. But it is good to know that decision fatigue is a real thing, and you have to be careful for it. It's okay to say, hey, I'm going to decide on this tomorrow. I'm not going to decide today because it'll be a hasty decision, and you don't want to be doing that. So let's do it tomorrow. So let's talk about a few of the decision-making techniques. Word of caution, there's not a single technique I can give you that suddenly makes you a better decision maker. Doesn't exist. I think it's experience that will get you there eventually. But here are a few things that you can rely on, that you can sort of fall back to if you're ever sort of trying to look for the right way. So we start with 7 steps to effective decision making. Step number 1, identify the decision. Should I use Hateos? Should I refactor this code, or should I, whatever the decision is, identify it properly. Then you gather the relevant information. What systems communicate with this component? When was this component written? How often is it changed? I don't know. You can grab NPAF complexity. You can grab all these different things, but grab as much information that you deem relevant for your decision. Now identify the alternatives. So go through every option that you have. This could be refactor the code. This could be, I don't know, keep the code as it is, or this could be, well, still refactoring, but putting it into a microservice. It could be anything, but try to come up with at least 3 alternatives. This forces you to go beyond your first thoughts. This forces you to consider everything. And weigh the evidence. Weigh all the pros and cons and figure out which one comes out on top. Pick the one that comes out on top. Take the action. Review your decision and its consequences, which I think step 7 is something that we rarely really do. We usually make the decision, and then we're like, all right, let's move on. And then later on, you might be like, all right, well, was it really a good decision? I'm not sure. But you don't really formally sort of assess this decision. So try not to forget about step 7. And for Barry, this worked really well. He did a few of the steps of the 7 steps to effective decision making. He said, when solving a technical problem, I usually come up with 3 or more solutions. I do some quick prototypes, so we have their pros and cons. And this feedback allows me to discover a more elegant solution, one that combines the best without the drawbacks. So this can really help you get your creative mind going and make sure you go beyond that first thought that you have. Now let's say you have 2 options, but both options are sort of equal and you're not really quite sure which one to pick. Well, there's a lot of things you can do, but Naval Ravikant recommends, he's an angel investor and an entrepreneur. He recommends picking the choice that's more painful in the short term, because he's convinced short-term pain means long-term gain. Doing something right now and fixing something right now might hurt right now, but at least you won't have to hurt a lot more later on and you can benefit a lot more from it. Again, these are just simple techniques that you can apply when you feel like it's applicable. Another one from Gary Klein. He's a researcher and pioneer in the field of naturalistic decision-making. So that's decision-making in a natural environment, rather than it being a research in a lab with a very sterile and you know, sort of boarded off environment. So he says, do a pre-mortem. Before making a formal decision, imagine we are a year into the future. The plan was implemented as it now exists, but everything goes wrong. The outcome was a disaster. Take 5 to 10 minutes to write a brief history on why it went wrong. Why did it become a disaster? This really triggers people to use their creativity and to think back and to really think about what could possibly go wrong. It includes everyone instead of just people that are perhaps more, how do you say this, who are louder than others. So you ask every developer in the room, write this brief history, and then you can discuss that, and you'll find a lot more interesting insights into what could possibly go wrong. And did you account for all these different situations? Now, obviously, decision-making is a lot more, you don't just do it on your own, but you usually do it in a team. Few of us are actually able to make the decisions on our own and then just be like, all right, go and do that. I don't think that's a good idea to begin with. So, decision-making within the team. A few years ago, I was part of a team. We had about 6 to 8 developers, I think a tester, maybe 2 testers, and a product owner. We were working for a large telecom provider, and we had 2 systems. One was sort of, I guess, sort of a service bus, acting as like a spider in the large web of systems, and the other one was the front end. Now, halfway through the project, or I guess projects don't really end, so there's no halfway, but I guess a few months in or a year into it, I was assigned lead developer for this project. And suddenly I was getting a lot of questions from all the developers, and I had to make a lot of decisions, and I was like, all right, this is really overwhelming. I don't quite know how to handle this. So what I did was I introduced a decision-making framework. We put a few rules into place to make sure we guide this process properly. Rule number 1, decide who is responsible for the final decision. This ended up being me as the lead developer, which made sense. But we gave that person the right to sudo merge a pull request. So if something got out of hand, if a certain discussion took place and it was feeling sort of endless and you were like, well, should we really be investing time into this? I had the right to say sudo merge, and then I just merged the pull request. Now, I know this seems a little bit scary. Of course, it should be used with caution. But still, this is really useful because I feel like a lot of the time we get into a lot of discussions where it's not really that important which one we pick. Actually, it's worse not picking anything, right? That does a lot more damage than just picking one option. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, a decision is easier made with 3 developers than with 2. So we would see in our pull request certain discussions take place between 2 developers. And the problem with that is that you have stance A and you have stance B. But this is going to be a never-ending conflict. It could be a never-ending conflict until someone gives in. So we said, if there's ever a back and forth, maybe once or twice, tag a 3rd developer. Now, hopefully, that developer doesn't introduce a stance C, because that would be a problem. That would be a bit annoying. If that happens, we would have to escalate the decision-making process. But usually, that developer would pick either stance A or stance B, and we could move on. We would all agree that's fine. Unless someone had a serious complaint or a serious worry, then we could still escalate this process, but generally, this would be fine. The 3rd rule, as a lead, involve others into the decision to create support. Now, the word support, I actually prefer the word draagvlak in Dutch. I guess support is the right translation, but it still doesn't feel right. I don't know if that's just me. It's incredibly important to make sure decisions are made as the entire team. That way, you get a lot more support in order to pursue this decision further. When someone just tells you, you're going to be doing that, you're like, okay, but I don't really know why. I don't know what the considerations were, and I'm not sure if I agree with this. This isn't come from me. This is coming from someone who's just directing me to do things, and nobody likes to be directed to do things. Although sometimes it's quite nice. You don't have to think about anything. You're like, all right, sure, I'll just do it. But generally, we don't like it. So try to involve everyone into this process. Try to make sure that everyone gets these considerations. Everyone has their say. They can have their inputs. And then when a decision is made, it will be carried a lot better. And actually, this creates a better technical vision. Creating a rule number 4, creating a shared technical vision and reiterating often is also very important, because what you want to prevent is the entire team becoming dependent on someone, because that slows down all the processes. You want autonomy within your team, but the only way to create autonomy is by making sure everyone knows where you're headed. Everyone knows that point on the horizon, the stip op the horizon. Everyone knows where to go. So make sure you have this shared technical vision, and people can make decisions based on that technical vision. I'm convinced as a lead developer, it's your job not to decide, but to facilitate the decision. Just because lead doesn't mean that you just decide everything and that you direct everyone. It means that you're responsible, and it means you have to make sure the team comes to a good decision, but facilitate it. I said that. I'm sure other people said it, but it's recorded now, so there you go. All right, so decision-making framework. Now, I guess if there's one thing I want you to walk away from this talk with, it'll be this part, documenting decisions. You cannot underestimate how important it is to document your decisions. And I found out about this in 2018, where I wrote this decisions.md. It's in the root of our repository for a project I was working on. And as you can see, it's a decisions log, GraphQL bundle. We were deciding on why were we going to use GraphQL, and which bundle were we going to use, and what were our considerations, and so on and so forth. Now, at the time, I didn't know how important this was going to be, but a year later, I was like, okay, so we have this bundle, but it's actually giving us a few problems. And I'm actually not sure whether it was the right choice. Luckily, I created this markdown document in the repository. I could look back and I could see what Rick from a year ago was thinking. Why did he make this decision? And this actually helped me make, or at least reevaluate the decision. We decided to still continue with the same bundle because I wasn't taking into account some of the considerations that I wrote down here when I was reevaluating the decision. But I can't stress enough how important it is to do this, because there's no going back. You cannot possibly a year later be like, all right, oh shit, documenting our decisions. Okay, so we chose that because it's good. I don't know. It's really hard to go back in time and to consider the entire ecosystem at that point in time. So if there's one thing I want you to walk away with, it's that you start doing this and start doing this today. Now, this is a bit free form, though I still think it's better than nothing. But there's definitely a standard for this, which is architectural decision record. Also, any decision record, because it's not just for architecture. This gives you a bit more of a formal thing to hold on to. And I can scroll through it a little bit for you. Oops, there you go. So, yeah, so this is a decision record template by Michael. It has the title. Whoops, don't do that. The status, the context, the decision that was made, and the consequences that come out of it. So this is a great place to start. And again, start doing this today. If you want to know more, it's adr.github.io. There's a lot more explained over there and some useful links. So let's go back to our framework. We had 4 rules. Let's add a 5th rule. Document your decisions using ADRs. Again, I can't stress how important it is. Please start doing this today. You can't do it later down the road. Anyone here who plays chess? Few people. Is that your job, chess? I'm joking. So let's talk about chess. Yeah. Does anyone know what's going on here? So I was looking for stock photos, pretty chess stock photos, and I came across, I just could not put it in the presentation because it's amazing. There's a lady wearing a gas mask. He's holding it to his head, and they're playing chess on I don't even know what it is, but whatever. That's not the point. It doesn't really. I just wanted to show you that. But let's talk about chess. So I actually come from a chess family, as in my family has always been into chess. Well, actually, just my brother, really. But that took all of us with him. I was also playing chess for a long time, but at some point, I was kind of sick and tired of being Stefan's little, not this guy, Stefan's little brother. Stefan is my brother. As you can tell, he's pretty good. And one of the higher rated players in chess, at least in the Netherlands. So I eventually stopped playing chess. But the point is, there's actually something we can learn from chess players. Now, in chess, there's 3 phases. You have the opening phase, where white plays, black responds with the best move, and so on and so forth. That's usually just a lot of theory. They study a lot of this theory and they know it by heart. They know all the variants and stuff, and they know the best moves to that. Then there's the second phase, which is the mid game. This is where pieces are getting captured or maybe traded or lost, and the defenses are built or maybe some attacks are done. And then you have the last phase, the end game, where checkmate, stalemate, or just a draw could be the case as well, or someone goes through their time. So you can imagine that time management is pretty important for these chess players. They need to know when to invest more time into a certain move than certain other moves. They need to know when it's important to invest time into their decision making. Because obviously there's a clock, so you can't go on forever. And yeah, so that's a problem. So we can learn from this as developers because it's actually no different for us. When we bootstrap a new application or we're starting a new setup, we're doing the opening. We're doing a lot of things that are familiar to us, things that we know, things that we trust. We're familiar with it. It's pretty easy. At some point, we get to the mid-game. We get to the complexity of the software. And this is where things start to get more difficult. So it all comes down to being good at recognizing critical moments, knowing when the next move you're going to make is a critical one, is an important one, is going to make or break the game. And the same thing goes for developers. When we're in the mid-game, when we're past our bootstrapping thing, and we're at the complexity of the software, if we make mistakes there, it might compound into bigger pain later on. So the way that chess players actually practice this skill is by analyzing their games. You can see my brother is writing on a piece of paper there. He's taking notes. What he's doing is he's writing down all the moves that were done for both parties, so that after the match, he can actually go ahead and analyze this game together with the opponent or other chess players who are maybe better in opening and someone else in endgame and someone else in the mid-game. And doing this actually helps them become better at recognizing these critical moments, because at that point, when they're analyzing the game, they're like, oh, okay, I missed an opportunity, or I missed this critical moment here. And this becomes very important. And even oftentimes, people think they see a critical moment, but it's actually a few moves before that the actual critical moment takes place. Because if you'd done it right from the start, you wouldn't have gotten into the situation. And I think the same thing goes for us. When we have, for example, a class which does one thing and does one thing properly, does one thing well, and suddenly it starts to get a little bit more behavior. Sort of scope creeps into the class. It gets bigger, it gets more important. There's more systems communicating with this class, and all of a sudden you have a pretty complex class. That happens because we didn't recognize the critical moment. We didn't recognize when this class was starting to get out of hand. We didn't decide to start to invest more time into decision making, to be like, hey, maybe we should be refactoring this. Maybe we should stop and think about this better. Now, within chess, there's obviously a lot of chess engines that can just give you the answer. Like, okay, that's the best move, or that's the best move, or this is where you went wrong. This is Artur Yusupov. He's a pretty famous chess player. He was once ranked third in the world, and he actually played for the team in Apeldoorn. He does so, I think he still does so today. He lives in Germany now. And my brother asked him, you know, with all these chess engines, why do we still bother analyzing? What's the point? How should we approach this? To which Artur said, it's not about the right answers. It's about doing the actual analysis, actually reasoning about the game, having a discussion with your fellow chess player that'll actually train your system one, that'll train your intuition, that'll train you in recognizing these critical moments. And I think that's very insightful. And I think that's something that we as developers don't nearly do as often. I mean, we do review code, but do we actually review code from the past or code that we've written before? How often do you do that? We have retrospectives, but those are mostly process, right? It's mostly like, all right, did the daily go well? Or maybe there's some technical thing that's maybe a bit, that went wrong or something, but it's not really on a detailed level. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to start doing technical retrospectives. This can be anything that you like, as long as it's looking back at code that exists or code that was written before and trying to have this discussion with your fellow developers. Because just giving people the answer and be like, this was wrong, we should have chosen this, is not helpful. I mean, sure, there's some merit in doing that, but it's not training developers. It's not helping developers develop that system one, and being that better decision maker when they're writing the code. And it's not helping them recognizing the critical moments, realizing when this class actually getting a lot bigger and a lot more responsibilities. So what you could do, and I'm sorry, this is PHP, so you can look away if you want. So this is PHP metrics. You could run PHP metrics over your code. It gives you a lot of information, and some of it might not be useful, some of it might, but you can see For example, you can see, in Git, you can see which file was changed the most. This might actually be a pointer for that being a risky file, or for that file having a little bit too many responsibilities, that it's changing so often, that it's being committed so often. But you can also see complexity between objects, object relations, seeing how many lines actually go to your class and figuring out, hey, are there any God classes in my code? I think this is very useful to do, and it might even be interesting to do this in a few different points in time in your Git timeline. So you could do this somewhere at a quarter, halfway through, and 3/4, and figure out, why did something grow to be as big? How did this actually become this way? It'll help you become a better developer. Another thing you can do is have a whiteboard session. Do a risk analysis, or start ranking non-functional requirements like maintainability or security or performance or accessibility. Start ranking them and see which one are ranked worse, and ask yourself the question, why is this one ranked worse, and how can we figure out what exactly is the problem that's underneath this. Start analyzing your code. Start talking about your code. This discussion is very important. So, takeaways. 1, a healthy state of mind helps you be a better decision maker. Sleep well, be organized, and just be in a good mood. Easy. 2, experience training your system 1 means more space for your system 2. Again, this is not easy. This just takes time. You can't really force this. Well, I guess you could be coding every day, but I'm pretty sure most of you already do. But realizing this is incredibly useful, and try and introduce as many automations and as many standards and things that you can just take away all the menial, stupid little decisions that you're making, and so you can actually focus on the bigger ones, the ones that actually matter and have a greater impact. 3, apply the 7 steps to effective decision making. Use this to make sure you're ticking off all the boxes. You're not missing anything. You're not forgetting anything. Go through the 7 steps. It's really easy, quick and simple. You can just start doing it tomorrow. 4, create a decision-making framework within your team. Get a good consensus on what the rules are. Make sure it's clear when something can be escalated, or when people can just make the decision themselves. This really helps, especially in larger teams, to create this autonomy and make sure you keep moving on with delivering value, which is actually what you're there to do. 5, document your decisions using ADR. Please start doing this today. Again, very important. You can't do this in retrospect. And 6, analyze previously written code and get better at recognizing those critical moments. Think like a chess player. Try to be there before it becomes a problem. Thank you. I'm scared to ask for questions after seeing what happened to Sander. Any questions?
Can you compare system 1 and system 2 thinking to conscious and subconscious thinking?
Yes, you very well can. Your system 1 it's your fast brain. It's intuitive. It's things you don't really think about that you're doing. As me doing this, it wasn't a conscious decision. That it's my subconscious. And your system 2, correcting these things. For example, when you're exhausted and you get home after a long day of work, and maybe you get into an argument with your partner, your system 2, which is generally lazy, it requires mental effort, it might be too lazy to intercept the thoughts that come from system 1. So you might be like, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that on screen. It might flip the other person off, or you might yell at them, or maybe swear, just because you're too tired to consciously correct your own behavior. I don't think there's I guess there's no binary in psychology, right? I guess you can't fully say that, but in a general sense, yeah, you can sort of look at it like that. Yes. I guess your system 2 is also always sort of there, and you're not necessarily always consciously thinking about it, but in a general sense, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh God, are you mad at me? I'm so sorry. It was a very bad decision.
No, I'm just wondering, Do you have any pointers on how to deal with a situation in which you, as a team member, aren't being involved in the decision making?
Ooh. Ooh, that's very annoying. Do I have any pointers when you're not being involved? Well, I guess maybe it's a bit cliche, but start the conversation. I guess that's a good place to start. Tell them what sort of effect that has on you, and because I'm pretty sure at some point you're going to be like, well, screw it, I'm just going to go somewhere else. I don't want to work here because no one is actually listening to me, and I don't feel like I'm putting in anything of myself into this piece of code. So I guess that's a pretty good threat in today's market. So you could start doing that. I guess that's where it has to start, because if they're not going to be asking for your input, it's kind of hard to inject yourself in those situations, because a lot of them are just going to go past you. So yeah, definitely start the conversation and tell them what actually is the impact. I guess I don't have any other golden or silver bullet for you there. Anyone else? Oh dear. Yeah, you think of a question, so they have is to walk.
Yeah, so you're up next, on the other side of the room. Now, my question was, how do you see all the remote and hybrid working right now in relation to this? And what's your take on that?
So decision making taking place in, I guess, it's sort of it's less visible. You mean, because
yeah,
you
all
don't
the
see
things
people
you talked about, or about talking with each other and discussing decisions with each other, and perhaps that's being a bit more difficult right now.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think it's good to make sure that you have the tools available to emulate things that you have in real life as much as possible. So having a shared whiteboard is a good way of doing it. But I think most of it comes down to having that decision-making framework, having the everyone agreeing on, that's not my fault, okay. Everyone agreeing on the process and being able to trust that part, and knowing that when something is being decided, that they're going to be included. I think Slack, or at least just async messaging is always a good way, right? Making sure that, for example, in our company, we were trying to make sure that we reduce the amount of DMs, right? We reduce the amount of direct messages, make sure if you have a question for someone, you put it in the channel, you tag them, but give other people the opportunity to inject themselves into the conversation so they're not missing out. And I think these practices essentially make it possible to work better from home, work better remotely, and still be sure to have this shared technical vision and have these conversations flowing. But yeah, I guess it's also partially discipline. It's quite easy to have this sort of Google Meet open with one person, and then you suddenly have made a decision and you're like, okay, we decided on this. It's a lot less visible, so you got to be careful in doing that. You got to make sure you include everyone else. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, thanks. So you're up on the other.
Oh, actually, it works. Yeah. Was that a joke or not? Do you have? Oh, really? Okay. Well, okay.
Regarding documenting decisions, I saw that you created a Markdown document to document design decisions.
Yeah.
Do you also use Git version control to document the why of certain commits? I mean,
in a commit message.
Yes. Sorry?
Yeah. He said yes. Well, I agree with Sander. Yeah. Do I do it? Do as I say, not as I do, I guess. No, I try to do it. I do think it's a very good point. Well, I guess when squashing commits, that becomes one bigger commit message in which you can still read some of the intent. I do think that's a great way of doing it. It doesn't really give you, I guess, maybe it's a bit too invisible for certain decisions. So it's good when you're doing sort of like when you're sort of an archaeologist and you're trying to go through the Git timeline and figure out, okay, why did we decide on this 2 years ago? And I guess that's something that we have today, and then we hope that there's decent commit messages. But I think having a decision MD, it sort of forces you to have all these considerations. I mean, I guess you could template your Git message as well and do the same thing, but that would be a bit exhaustive if you do this for every single commit that you do. So that becomes a little bit more difficult. But I think it's a good addition to doing the decisions MD as well, or in Confluence or whatever. Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very valid point.
The reason I'm asking is I started on a new code base, and I'm not sure, are you using PHP Store or?
I am, yes.
So I always have the Gutter Git annotate open.
Yeah.
So when I don't understand something, I click on the annotate and see what the reason was for introducing the code, changing the code. So I hope to find the decisions, and they're not always there, so that's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, that's worth its weight in gold, because we put our tickets in the quick message as well, so you can look up the Jira ticket, and then you can also go back to the GitLab merge request or the GitHub pull request, and in there you hope to find something good, but it's not always the case. But yeah, that's definitely very useful. Yeah. Going back and forth. Oh, okay. Oh, you're cutting him some slack.
I don't really have a question per se. I just had a kind of a loud thought that I wanted to share or maybe measure with you if you think this is a good idea. Because the problem I have mostly with this decisions.md or the architecture document, I saw a talk about it like a few years ago. I got super excited about it. And then I got super lazy and never did it. So, I mean, I guess I could ask you, well, let's just start with that. Do you have any, do you ever have that as well, or in the team, like people don't want to tackle this, updating that entire decision.md? It's not really important, they think, it's just a small decision. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think one thing that works well for us, you know, are you using GitLab by any chance?
Yeah, and Azure DevOps.
Okay.
But GitLab as well.
Okay, so I know this is the case for GitLab, but I don't know if it's the case for anything else. I'm sure there's a way. GitHub has it as well. But my point is, using the merge request templates, adding in the little checkbox, did you update the decisions.md or does it need updating? I think that's probably the best trigger so far that I've found to sort of force people in doing it. But yeah, I guess it becomes a matter of culture, really reiterating. And I think I also think that's what makes a good leader, where you convey a very simple message, just a simple and clear message, and you repeat it over and over and over and over again until people don't forget. And I think the same thing needs to happen for this. I think it should be part of your technical vision, and I think it should be reiterated often enough that people just can't miss it. And if they do miss it, then
you punish them.
You punish them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you. I just had the exact same thought in my head, like I should make a pull request template and put that in there. So
yeah,
we're on the same line.
Usually helps best. Yeah, exactly. What you could also do if you're using Jira is have those annoying pop-ups that come up when you try to move it to the next status. Like, did you update the decisions.md? Or yeah, okay, never mind. You know, bad idea. Don't do it. Anyone else from here? Right. I just want to say, I've never had an audience ask this many questions. Not in conferences, not in meetups. This is I don't know what you're doing, but this is exceptional.
Well, thank you for your presentation. You've clearly done your homework, and that's why I want to ask you this question. The most difficult for me about making decisions is the decision which infects me in a negative way.
Ooh.
And I make most of my decisions, I know it's the right thing to do or the right thing to say, but you know it can have a huge negative impact on yourself. I want to ask you, do you still go to your whole tree, or do you know I have to do this because it's the right thing to do? It's your instinct, it's your gut. You have to speak out before it. That, for me, mostly it's the latter, but it's still difficult to do. And do you have any tips to deal with that?
I understand. Is this regarding workload mostly?
Difficult things. It could be workload, or you see something happening in your work environment. You know it's not right.
Oh yeah.
But if you speak up, you know maybe people higher in charge or could in fact.
Okay, so I think it's really good to stick to your values, stick to what's important to you, because if you don't do that and if you don't speak up, you're going to become unhappy, and that's a lot worse. You don't want to get into that situation. God, I had an answer cooked up in my head. Oh, isn't this great? No, I know. So it's actually really important to follow your intuition. I think we underestimate how powerful and how knowledgeable our intuition is, and how often it is actually right. So I would definitely encourage you to stick to your intuition. And I would definitely encourage you to ask yourself the question, am I happy if I make this choice, or am I happy if I make that choice? Because ultimately, that's what matters. I don't really give a shit if people, well, I guess it's not my job, it's your job. But I think it's a lot more important to stick to your own truth and stick to things that you find important than thinking about what other people think. Okay, so that's the only thing I can give to you as sort of words of encouragement. But yeah, there's no silver bullet in trying to navigate your way through that. But stick to your own truth.
Thank you.
I hope that helps. Anyone else? All right. Oh, there you go.
I might just want to maybe add something to that. What I'm thinking, because you're the presenter, I don't want to.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Just like, if you're in the situation where you have an opinion that the team might not like, I think it's important for the team to know that you have the good intentions, right? I think that's maybe also a big part of the team culture. If you're afraid to speak out in the team, I think it's still a good decision to do so. But I think it's maybe even a better decision to figure out why you are afraid to make that decision. What is wrong with the culture? What should be fixed for this?
Yeah.
It's not, that's just maybe something else to look into.
No, I'm actually very glad that you add that point, because I've always made sure that within our team culture that everyone constantly realizes that there's always good intentions. People are generally good. There's always good intentions about the things they do. So always be curious. But of course, that's the responding factor, and that's something you have a lot less control over. So, but yeah, it's definitely what you're trying to say. It's definitely a cultural issue if you don't feel safe to voice certain things, or if you don't feel safe to make certain decisions. So yeah, definitely good intentions. Anyone else? Ooh, I thought I saw someone move their arm. I was like, oh God, there's another one.
Really hoping for more now. Eh?
Yeah, well, am I counting them? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I could. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So I'll release you from your fear of heights. If that's yeah. Thank you everybody for attending this this evening and these great talks. Is it turned off? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you everybody for attending these wonderful talks on the technical side, but I think also on a personal, professional level, very interesting and good food for thought to take home. We will be organizing another Ode to the Code, Ode to the Code, Ode aan de Code. Hopefully soon again. It's not yet planned, but just stay tuned and sign up via the probably well-known channels like LinkedIn and everything to stay up to date. If you have any feedback for the speakers or for us, feel free to send us a message or tell us personally. And if you have ideas or plans for future talks, please let us know, because we're always looking for new interesting things to happen. For now, I'd like to thank our speakers again. If you want to come on stage, or you can stand next to the stage. We have some gifts for you. It does involve some decision making, as in which one to take first. There's some nice beers. Another little gift for you. So I hope that was nice. That's it for now. You can enjoy some more drinks if you want. I'm not sure at what time we will be locking the doors, but I think at that time it would be great not to be inside. Can anybody tell me what time? Oh, wow. Okay, that's promising. There's still some drinks in the fridge, so feel free to dig in. And another applause for our speakers.